The big news this week is, of course, the negotiations going on in Switzerland between the United States and Iranian teams. The reports coming out of these talks by the different parties are a smorgasbord of claims, counterclaims, fairy tales, threats, and good old-fashioned nonsense. Meanwhile, the battle against Hezbollah in Lebanon continues. All that and much more is just ahead on this week's edition of VFI News from Israel. Shalom everybody, I'm Barry Seagull and this is from the Israel Desk. I have to start with the news about the news, and by that I mean all the different reactions to last week's announcement that the Trump administration and officials from Iran have agreed to and signed a memorandum of understanding known as the MOU, which sets the tone for negotiations to end the war. Now this MOU has 14 points, and without exhausting analyzing them, because many others already have, the general appearance here is that Iran got all kinds of goodies in exchange for little more than promises of good behavior. U.S. President J.D. Vance has been the administration's frontman for this process, and he was quick to say in several media interviews he gave about it that Iran will not get any money from the United States or anyone else until they've earned it by living up to the commitments they've made. The Iranians, however, are saying they're going to get a lot of money up front. They're also saying the MOU's first point obligates Israel to stop attacking Hezbollah in Lebanon, while Hezbollah must be allowed to continue attacking Israel. This is obviously absurd, chutzpah. And to his credit, President Trump very explicitly said in a Truth Social post on Sunday evening that Iran needed to rein in Hezbollah or the United States would hit Iran with military strikes. Now, a few hours later, the first round of talks in Switzerland ended with the Iranian delegation saying that significant progress had been made towards ending the fighting in Lebanon. But what that actually meant was left up to whoever heard these words to decide for themselves, kind of a lot like other things said by all parties in these talks. Now on that point, I want to switch to commentary mode and bring up a name we haven't heard for a while, and that's Yasser Arafat, who led the Palestinian National Movement, or the PLO, for many years before passing away in 2004 at the age of 75 years old. He had a habit of saying one thing in English when he was speaking to Western audiences and then saying something else entirely different in Arabic when he spoke to Palestinian audiences or Arab media outlets. Now, other Arab leaders also did that, and as hypocritical and two-faced as it was, in retrospect, we must admit that there was a certain utility in this system. At least back then, everyone knew which audience Arafat was speaking to when he spoke in these different languages. He was often lying, no matter what language he spoke in, but at least we knew who he was lying to, and we could make a pretty good guess what he was trying to accomplish by doing so. Now these days, because of the internet, everyone's statements, true or untrue, get instantly translated into multiple languages and then broadcast in the open to everyone. No one has any idea who the intended audience is, so we have no clear idea what anyone is trying to accomplish, and this leads to terrible confusion. For instance, Iranian officials make many statements that are ridiculously untrue, and we all wonder who they think they're fooling. Well, the simple answer is that they're trying to fool their own population and maybe even themselves. That's why they said they won the 12-day war last June in 2025, and why no matter how badly they got mauled in this most recent round of conflict with Israel and the United States, they called it their great victory. It sounds preposterous to Western ears, and I am quite certain that on some level the Iranian leadership knows that, but they don't care, because Western ears are not their target audience. Their number one goal is to keep their own restive population under control, and the lies they tell are all focused on that one goal. If we keep this in mind, we can at least have a somewhat clear idea about what they're trying to accomplish with some of their more ludicrously absurd statements and nonsense. Now I must, out of fairness, also make a comment on statements made in recent days by President Trump, Vice President Vance, and others in the American administration. Many of these statements contradict each other or are otherwise very confusing. I think it would be helpful if before they make them, they let us all know who their intended audience for that particular statement is. Another pattern seems to be emerging from their recent statements, which makes me very nervous. There seems to be a mindset in this administration that they can control smaller countries the way landlords can exert control over the people who rent their apartments in New York City. There are a couple of different ways this shows up in the MOU. First, the statements that Trump and Vance make about the new group of leaders who appear to have taken control in Tehran after so many members of the hardline clerical establishment and the old guard of the IRGC who were assassinated make them sound like the New York City Mafia. Now, Trump and his chief negotiator, Steve Witkoff, they know what it's like to deal with underlings in the New York City area through years and decades of business in order to get real estate deals done. Now, they seem to think these guys in Tehran can be dealt with in the same way, by paying them off with some extra money or something in order to ensure that they behave themselves. This totally disregards the possibility that these, quote, new guys might be just as ideologically motivated as their predecessors, and that's an assumption I don't see any reason to make at this point. We could be setting ourselves up for much bigger problems down the line by doing this. But another way Trump is acting like a New York City businessman or landlord is his attitude towards Israel and the Arab states. Now, Vance says the United States is not going to be contributing towards the $300 billion Iran Reconstruction Fund, which is mentioned specifically in the MOU, and I believe him. But where is that money going to come from? The only logical answer to that question is that it will have to come from Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the UAE, etc.? Does Trump think these countries don't have their own plans for their own money? Does he think he can just tell their leaders what to do with that money and they'll do it whether they want to or not? For that matter, does he think he can just tell Israel to stop fighting Hezbollah, who's shooting rockets and drones at Israel from Lebanon, and Prime Minister Netanyahu will salute and say, "Yes, sir," and order the IDF to pull back? He appears to think that Iran can order Hezbollah to stand down, and so I guess he thinks he's got that same ability to boss Israel around, and it'll all just work the way he wants it to. Why else would the first point in the MOU be about how fighting will stop in Lebanon, even though neither Hezbollah nor Israel, to say nothing of Lebanon's internationally recognized government, were consulted or even informed about this clause or anything else in the MOU? Last but not least, an offhand remark President Trump made about how he thinks he might turn the battle against Hezbollah over to the forces loyal to Syria's interim president, Abu Muhammad Al-Jolani, would be hilarious if it wasn't so dangerous. To his immense credit, and I mean this sincerely, Al-Jolani quickly declared that he has no intention of moving against Hezbollah at this time. You also get the distinct impression that he is both baffled and annoyed that President Trump seems to think that he is at liberty to make such commitments on behalf of others without even bothering to inform them, much less ask if it's okay. I also find it quite interesting. Now, to be fair, though, to President Trump, he is far from being the first American president to make this mistake of expecting smaller countries to accept American directives as if they had no agency of their own. But smaller countries do have agency, and in Israel's case, because we're a democracy, public opinion actually matters here. On that note, a poll was conducted this past week by the Hebrew University in Jerusalem showing that 92.1% of Israelis believe Iran has found a way to emerge victorious from this situation despite being overwhelmingly defeated on the battlefield, militarily speaking. They blame President Trump for this failure, but they also have a very dim view of Israel's own government led by Prime Minister Netanyahu, whose approval rating in the poll was hovering around 30%, a historic low. Chutzpah again. This, of course, has implications for the elections which will take place in Israel by late October, if not sooner. For better or for worse, a solid majority of Israel's voting public is ready for new political leadership, and so am I. and there are growing voices even within the Likud for Netanyahu to retire and give someone else a chance to lead the party. I personally doubt he'll agree to that no matter how loud such voices become, and it's important to note that his political career has been pronounced over many times in the past. But he's still here, still in charge, once again for better or for worse. The polls show varying degrees of popularity for his rivals, but this far out from the day of voting, those polls don't mean too much. One person who is very popular in Israel but who can't run in elections here is U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee. He took a risk this past week making a statement about how America owes its existence to Israel, directly contradicting an assertion that President Trump made that Israel owes its existence to him. On Sunday evening, Huckabee addressed the JNS International Policy Summit in Jerusalem and started by making a joke about how he'd check Trump's social media accounts before coming to the event to make sure he hadn't already been fired. He then went on to seriously address concerns that many Israelis have that Trump is not taking their concerns about Iran seriously enough, declaring that this is not the case and that Israelis need to stay the course. I hope that's true, and I hope Ambassador Mike Huckabee continues to be the U.S. ambassador to Israel for a very long time. Now, despite my own very deep reservations about this MOU with Iran and the negotiations, which are just getting started, I do find Huckabee's reassurances somewhat reassuring. Although the MOU is deeply flawed, and it's obvious that the Iranians are going to try to play the American negotiators like a violin, I do have some hope that they'll do what they've done so often before, which is overplay their hand and underestimate their enemies. Now, speaking of Iran's enemies, last Sunday, the IDF discovered a tunnel running dozens of meters underneath the village of Majd al-Zaun in southern Lebanon that housed a factory for assembling Iranian-supplied explosive kamikaze drones. Launch sites for these drones were also built into the underground facility, and it can be assumed that this was just one of the many such facilities that Hezbollah has built with Iranian assistance within striking distance of the Galilee. Now, this discovery reinforces my personal conviction that the battle against Hezbollah isn't going to end anytime soon, despite the initial signs that this is on top of the agenda for the negotiators and the negotiations being conducted in Switzerland. I do not doubt that Hezbollah will continue to fire rockets and drones at northern Israeli communities for some time to come, and that Iran and possibly once again the Houthis in Yemen will also continue to periodically threaten to fire missiles at us. And that is why here at Vision for Israel, we are continuing to supply bomb safety shelters to communities all over the country in the north, the south, the east, and the west. So if you want to know more, please visit our website, visionforisrael.com, and please once again watch this short video. Vision for Israel has been installing bomb safety shelters since actually around the fall of 2021. During that year, there was a barrage of rockets that came into southern Israel, particularly by the terrorist group known as Hamas, and Israel had to find a way further in order to protect its citizens, its residents across the southern part of Israel. And so we sprung into action. We felt like this was a project that we had a personal invitation to fulfill. And it's important because when these projectiles, these missiles, these rockets, whatever that is that's thrown at Israel by its enemies, there is not only the potential for somebody being killed instantly, but also there's tremendous collateral damage and people that get wounded even from shrapnel. And so if you place a safety shelter at a bus stop, or in front of a high school or community center or a kindergarten or any kind of facility that's publicly accessible, the people can run into these shelters. The children can run and find safety in them and be protected from a rocket that lands and shrapnel is scattered, which could be mortally wounding people. So it gives not only a physical protection of security, but also an emotional sense of security that having a shelter that you can run to in the street, outside of a store, somewhere publicly accessible, not just in someone's home, but out in the open, gives a sense of security. And I always believe that it's important for us to refer to Scripture. In Psalm 91, the whole chapter talks about God providing us a shelter. And we have seen amazing deliverances from enemy rockets as a result. And now we've installed over 400 shelters across the southern and northern borders of Israel. And they weigh 30,000 kilos each, or that's 30 tons. And it's a lot of weight on rebar and concrete that's been specially mixed, and also with a special metal ramp that allows physically impaired people to be able to come up in a walker or a wheelchair on a moment's notice. In many of these areas, residents don't have any longer than between 5 seconds to maximum 45 seconds to get into a shelter to be protected. Welcome back. Now, we talked a lot about this MOU with Iran in the first half of the program, but that's not the only story we're following this week here at VFI News. Last Sunday, the Shin Bet confirmed something that many of us have long suspected, that Hamas operatives based in Turkey have been directing terrorist attacks here in Israel for some time. The Shin Bet said it has broken up literally dozens of such attempted attacks in the past year. The statement added that, quote, over the years and with increased intensity over the past year, operatives in the West Bank headquarters have been directing and advancing extensive military activity into Judea and Samaria and Israel from Turkish soil, including recruiting operatives to carry out attacks and transferring weapons and funds into the area to advance military activity, unquote. The statement also named several Hamas operatives who carry out their activities unhindered from Turkish territory. And it can be assumed that if the Israeli intelligence agencies know about this, the Turkish law enforcement agencies know a lot about it too. But they're not doing anything to stop it, and that's a really big problem. And I've said before on this program and elsewhere that it is long past time for Israel specifically and the West more generally to stop treating Turkey like an ally and face up to the fact that it is something else altogether entirely different. One of the primary reasons Israel cannot step out on its own to seriously confront Turkey is that Israel's economy is deeply intertwined with Turkey's in a number of ways. Despite all the hostility directed at Israel by Turkey's political leadership and Erdogan, the two countries still do billions of dollars worth of business every year. In particular, Israel receives most of its oil supplies from Azerbaijan via pipelines that go to the Turkish port city of Ceyhan on the Mediterranean coast in the southeastern Adana province. Now, Turkey makes a great deal of money through this arrangement, so some might say they need Israel to keep getting oil supplies from this port as much as Israel needs to keep relying on it. However, and this circles back to the subject of the Strait of Hormuz, the port of Ceyhan is a hub that oil pipelines converge on from several different directions, and oil is loaded and exported there to several different places. It has taken on even greater importance in the last few months as oil shipments from the Strait of Hormuz have all but dried up, and that trend is likely to continue, giving Turkey options if it wants to drop Israel from its list of oil delivery clients. For instance, the Iraq-Turkey oil pipeline delivers crude oil to Ceyhan from the northern Iraqi city of Kirkuk. And in recent weeks, Iraq has also attempted to mobilize fleets of tanker trucks to send even more oil out through Turkey. Now this week, plans were announced to massively expand Iraqi oil exports through Turkey and also Syria's Mediterranean port of Banyas. Around 50,000 barrels a day worth of Iraqi fuel oil are already being moved to Banyas by tanker trucks so it can be exported to markets in Europe and Africa. There is also talk of building a pipeline to allow even higher volumes to be moved through the port, and the Al-Jolani regime is feverishly working to expand the port's infrastructure to allow for this. Now, this is all part of a larger trend among oil exporting countries in the region who are looking for their ways to reduce their dependency of the ability to export through the Strait of Hormuz. Saudi Arabia made extensive use of its east-west pipeline during this crisis, and the whole world should be very grateful that they had the foresight to build it back in 1982. Which was the last time Iran tried to shut down maritime traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. The UAE has also been busy, even before the war started, building an additional pipeline to the port of Fujairah, which will also allow it to export larger volumes of crude oil without using the Strait of Hormuz. Now, many pipelines are being built and planned, and there is a possibility that Israel might be the beneficiary of some of this work. Now, back in the British Mandate time, there were serious plans made to build a pipeline to move oil from Iraq to the port of Haifa, and that idea is once again being examined and resurrected. Even if such a pipeline is never built, Israel has already increased its exports of natural gas to European markets. This is one bright spot in Israel's economy, along with the defense industry, which has signed some enormous contracts in the last few months, mainly with militaries in Europe. The IDF is also playing large orders from domestic defense manufacturing companies to replenish the vast amounts of material, ammunition, and gear they used up in the conflicts of the past 2.5 years. These two industries, energy and defense, have created many jobs and brought in large amounts of capital investment to the country in recent years, which has partially offset the loss of both jobs and capital in Israel's shrinking high-tech sector. It would take me a long time to explain all the reasons behind that trend. But the bottom line is that Israel's economy has long been highly dependent on the high-tech industry, which directly employed hundreds of thousands of employees and indirectly supported many more jobs in big cities and small towns all over the country. Well, that's changing now, as these massive international companies are cutting their human workforce all over the world in favor of AI. And the industry is also consolidating in many other ways. Not everyone who loses their job, though, in high-tech can or wants to move to a job in the energy or defense industries, and most of Israel's other industries, particularly agricultural and tourism, continue to face very strong headwinds. And that's why here at Vision for Israel, as I've said before, we are continuing to provide assistance to families and communities in financial distress. The need has never been greater in nearly 3.5 decades we've been in operation. And if you want to know more about how you can help, please visit our projects and go to our website, visionforisrael.com, and please watch this short video. During the holidays, most families gather around a full table. But for some families in Israel, the question is simple and painful. How will we afford it this year? With the gift of $130, you provide a holiday grocery card directly into a parent's hands, allowing them to choose the food their household needs with dignity. Not a package, not leftovers, but the freedom to shop for their own family. Last year, supporters like you helped provide holiday support to thousands of families across Israel. For over 30 years, Vision for Israel has worked directly with local communities and social services to deliver trusted on-the-ground assistance. Before the holiday begins, cover one family, make sure one more table is full. For most children, the first day of school is exciting. But for some families in Israel, it's overwhelming. Parents are doing everything they can, but school supplies are expensive. For some children, even a backpack and basic supplies are out of reach. No child should start the school year feeling left behind. Without help, many children will walk into class lacking what they need. This is the moment we can step in. For over 30 years, Vision for Israel has provided practical support to families in need. Your gift equips a child for success. $45 provides a backpack with essential school supplies. $90 equips 2 children. $180 prepares 4 children for the year ahead. When you give, you're not just providing supplies, you're providing confidence. A simple backpack can change how a child feels walking into school. Prepared, confident, ready. Every child deserves a strong start. Give today. Help a child walk into school ready to succeed. Sponsor a child today. visionforisrael.com. Now we're almost out of time for this week's report, so I just want to briefly talk about something I thought and hoped I would never have to report on again, and that's the ongoing battle in the Knesset over the issue of judicial reform. It seems like another lifetime, but in the summer and fall of 2023, this issue was causing tremendous tensions in Israeli society. There were serious people saying that this issue could tear the country apart and even end up leading us into a civil war. We'll never know how close we came to such a disastrous situation because the war of survival we were forced to fight after October 7th interrupted this process. However, the proponents of judicial reform never forgot about this issue, and even in the midst of this desperate struggle we've been in for most of the past 3 years, they've continued to push for it. This past week, the issue was back in the news, and once again, it is proving highly divisive and contentious. Obviously, the current coalition government in the Knesset wants very badly to lock in some things before the upcoming elections, and just as obviously, the opposition and the judiciary itself don't want that. It would take far too long for me to go over all the details in the time we have left, so I will instead switch to commentary mode and simply tell you that the judiciary certainly does need reform, but so does the Knesset. These two branches of the Israel's deeply imperfect democracy are both operating with outdated software that has caused them to become deeply dysfunctional and almost completely unresponsive to the will of the people. I could say a lot more about that, but we've come to the end of this week's report, and I want to continue the tradition of ending with some good news. And to do so, we'll stay with the theme of elections. This week, voters in Colombia elected Abelardo de la Espriella to be their new president. Bravo! This pro-Israel candidate is expected to drastically change Colombia's policies after years of Bogota being very cold towards Israel. And I love Colombia. I've been there a few times. And with that, I'm Barry Seagull, and this has been another edition of the VFI News from Israel. God bless you and shalom.